I'm grateful to David and his colleagues for inviting me to your annual gathering, and only sorry that I cannot be with you. I trust that you are keeping well in these uncertain times. I've used a lot of slides in my talk, mainly because a picture can be worth 1,000 words. Only some of them are included in the video, so to see them all, you can go to a PDF on the website, alongside a copy of the text. In contrast to the plant-based diet currently in vogue, farm animals, particularly ruminants, have been getting a very bad press recently. According to Google Trends, the rise of veganism within the last decade has been exponential, and interest in it has increased sevenfold in the 5 years 2014 to 2019, although it has dropped off sharply since the start of the pandemic. One of the perceived benefits of the plant-based diet is to the environment. And in response to this, at a recent conference, Dr. Taro Takahashi from Rothamsted Research Station noted, "We know very little about what would happen to the world's soil if no livestock ever steps back on it, forever." Having spent 5 decades in rural Africa and Asia, I'd like to consider this question from their perspective, rather than through our Western urban eyes. In 2003, Adam Neiman showed all the world's water as 3 spheres. Total water, the largest sphere, total fresh water, and the fresh water that is accessible, which is barely visible. At the 2019 Groundswell Conference, Dr. Simon Jeffrey from Harper Adams did the same for the topsoil of the world's farmland. He showed it as a sphere. Here it is above the Groundswell Conference, just 25 kilometres across. That's it. That's the world's topsoil, the most precious resource without which humanity would cease to exist. Only 9% of the world's surface area is farmed, and 2/3 of that is covered with pasture. If we spread that ball of soil back across the world's farmland, 2/3 of it is under pasture, as can be seen here in Mongolia and North America, in West and East Africa, in South America and Australia. Pasture, which co-evolved with ruminant animals, and which together form much of the world's soil, is the world's single largest solar panel, and the soil under it is the world's largest terrestrial store of carbon. So what would happen if there were no animals on farms? In a recent media debate on the topic of should we all be vegan, I mentioned the horseshoe bat, a much loved but endangered species in UK, and noted that the lactating mother bat feeds on dung beetles and cockchafers that are found in dung pats. So if no cattle on pasture, then no dung pats, then no dung beetles, then no horseshoe bats. This came as a surprise to the mainly urban audience. Let me take you to India, where I had the privilege over 6 years of working in rural Bihar, the largest and economically poorest state. Every household that has access to land has 1 or more dairy cows or buffaloes. India is home to around 1/3 of the world's large ruminants, raised on pasture and crop byproducts. 75 million dairy farmers produce nearly 20% of the world's milk, collected through 60,000 dairy cooperatives, where every litre that is not consumed within the household flows into the urban areas. The income flowing back to the villages through the same cooperative channels. These animals also produce another vital commodity, dung. 5 kilograms of dung produces enough biogas to cook a meal for a large family. The spent manure, still retaining its nutrient value, is returned to the land to feed the soil. Pasture, ruminants, milk, manure, biogas, food, employment, income, an integrated farming, social and economic system based around ruminants that feeds both rural and urban people and feeds the soil. I've also worked in African countries in conflict, seeking to help rebuild the rural economy. Working with traumatized people as they return to their destroyed homes is a humbling experience. Listening to people's needs, common to everyone, was a wish to start farming again. And support for this has two key elements. The first, to provide seeds and tools, and the second, to provide a goat. Goats can convert otherwise indigestible fibrous plant material into nutrient-rich milk, as well as in due course to meat and skins. A village community selects a few members who are most competent at raising animals, and each receives a pregnant nanny goat or one with kids. They in turn select the person they feel has the most empathy with animals, who is trained to become a barefoot vet. When the nanny goat produces more offspring, half of them are given away to other members of the community to share in the benefits derived from these productive animals. These goats are vital to the seeding of new life. So dung beetles sustain horseshoe bats. Cows play a vital role in the economic and spiritual lives of around 500 million of India's rural people, whilst goats play a vital role in rebuilding the lives of rural people who have lost everything through conflict. Where would we be without animals on these farms? Until recently, ruminants were seen as a major cause of global warming. Thanks to the emergence of GWP*, biological methane is at last being recognised as a short-term greenhouse gas, so that after about 10 years, a herd of a fixed size no longer contributes to global warming. Significantly, since 1980, cattle numbers in UK have been declining. Until recently, ruminants were also seen as less efficient than pigs and poultry in converting feed into meat. But a recent study from Rothamsted notes that when greenhouse gases are compared with the nutrient density of the meat, rather than simply its mass, then cattle can be more efficient than pigs and poultry. This has particular relevance to wholly pasture-fed meat and milk, which has a higher nutrient density and higher levels of omega-3 and other beneficial nutrients. Biodiverse pasture has other merits. Its deep roots take carbon down into the soil and build its structure. The mass of vegetation above ground captures rainfall, slows its movement and allows it to percolate into the soil, where it is retained, reducing erosion and flooding and creating resistance to drought. As is clear in this picture taken in the drought in 2018. The monoculture of nitrogen-dependent ryegrass in the distance has turned brown in the sun, whilst the biodiverse, deep-rooting pasture on the hillside above is still flourishing. The very biodiversity of the plants is reflected in the nutrient composition and flavour of the meat, and where raised wholly on pasture, ruminants can be carbon neutral. Any discussion around what we eat needs to start with the soil. It is the most basic, vital and precious medium, without which humanity could not exist. And it's the world's largest single terrestrial store of carbon. When we cultivate the soil to produce the plants that are the basis of all diets, whether wholly plant-based or omnivore, we expose it to the elements, release carbon and moisture, and damage the fungi and bacteria living in it. Soil is washed away. That lost carbon needs to be reabsorbed, and the soil needs to be healed. In this picture, the high carbon soil core sample on the left comes from a pasture where rotational mob grazing is practiced. Cattle and sheep graze for one day, then move on to a fresh camp, leaving behind their dung and urine. The camp is only grazed again after 3 months of regrowth. The low carbon sample on the right comes from land where grains are grown and there are no ruminants to regenerate it. You do not have to be a historian to know that ruminant livestock and biodiverse pastures have been part of traditional closed-loop mixed farming systems across the globe since time immemorial, as well as making use of land that is too steep, wet or shallow to be cultivated. The grazed pasture acts as a pump that sucks the carbon back into the soil and builds the organic matter that retains water and nutrients. So how is it that such a central pillar of traditional farming systems should suddenly become the focus of so much criticism? We need to move the debate away from a simplistic one focused solely on farm animals to a wider one around the way we produce food. Animals have always played a vital role in mixed farming, mimicking nature. Until 50 years ago, cattle and sheep were raised almost entirely on pasture, whilst pigs and poultry were largely fed on waste. But as farming has become more industrialised, in response to the pressures to produce cheap food, animals are increasingly raised separately from the land that feeds them, out of balance, producing more manure than the land on which they are housed can absorb, polluting the environment. Tropical forest has been cleared to produce the palm oil for both vegan and omnivore diets, as here in Indonesia, as well as for soya and grain, primarily for animal feed. Almond trees are raised intensively under irrigation to produce almond milk. Oats are grown to produce oat milk, with the sludge that is left behind being fed to dairy cows to produce real milk. In the absence of animals on the land, the plants that we all consume are increasingly produced dependent upon a wide range of chemicals that damage the life of the soil and pollute the environment. The story of the journey to the plant-based food plate can often be laced with chemicals. We need to argue for balance. It's the how, not the cow or the sow, and that should be our focus. To maintain the fungal pathways and the soil's fertility, ideally, the soil should always be covered. As can be seen at this 200-acre organic farm of permanent pasture in the south of France, where there is not a plough in sight. Tall heritage wheat is planted directly into the pasture using compost tea, with just a herd of red Sussex cattle to manage the pasture and allow the wheat to compete. The harvested wheat is made into bread for sale in local shops. Across the globe, grazing ruminants continue to convert the 2/3 of the world's farmland that is pasture into meat, milk and skins, whilst on arable land they continue to heal and feed the soil that has been damaged through cultivation. However, reflecting industrialisation, ruminants are increasingly being fed grains and pulses that do not use the full capacity of the rumen and may even damage it. Working with materially poor people in rural Africa and Asia, I began to feel increasingly uncomfortable with 1/3 of the world's grain being fed to animals. In 2009, a chance meeting between 2 British farmers who were already raising their ruminant animals wholly on pasture led to the setting up of the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association, or PFLA, with its simple aim of encouraging farmers to raise their ruminant animals wholly on grazed and conserved pasture. In January 2010, 14 people, mainly farmers, came to our first meeting. We decided on 4 priorities. The first was to define what we meant by pasture-fed. The second was to find a way of ensuring the integrity of that definition, both for the benefit of the farmers raising the animals and for consumers for whom the health and environmental benefits of wholly pasture-fed produce are important. The third was to be in touch with all other movements that share the broader vision of farming in harmony with nature. And the fourth was not to be judgmental. Why did we use pasture-fed rather than grass-fed? Because this is grass and this is pasture. To define what we meant by pasture-fed, we initially established a collective mark called pastoral with the strapline pasture-fed for life. It was accompanied by a detailed set of standards submitted to the Intellectual Property Office. However, the rather intricate design of the logo did not survive the need to compress it for use on packaging, and in due course it was replaced by the simpler and bolder Pasture for Life. To ensure the integrity of the certified produce, we introduced on-farm audits delivered by an independent third party, as well as a tracking system called Tracks. Each certified animal is allocated a number linked to a QR code that is found on the certified produce at the point of sale. Reading the code, the consumer will find details about the animal and about the farm on which it was raised, as well as the location and the date of slaughter. To be in touch with other organisations that share the vision, we now have good working relationships with a wide range of organisations. And deciding to be non-judgmental has allowed us to build productive working relationships, even with those with whom we may not agree. PFLA now has approaching 600 members, over 80% of whom are farmers, spread across the UK and Ireland. Here they are, in the lowlands of Rutland and Wales, in the wet southwest of Cornwall, and at over 350 metres in North Yorkshire. Within the farming sector, the general response to the setting up of the PFLA was negative. The first reaction was that the raising of ruminants wholly on pasture would necessarily be seasonal. That is, it would not be possible to supply the market year-round. To counter that, we produced abattoir records from one of the founding members to show that carcasses of desirable grades were being produced even during March to May, at the end of winter. The second reaction was that it was not possible to make money from raising ruminants wholly on pasture. To counter that, we worked with the government's own stocktake programme, where its economists visited farms, collected data and benchmarked them against conventional farms. The impressive results were produced in 2016 in a document called Pasture for Life, It Can Be Done. People began to take us seriously. This document is now being updated for publication again in the summer of 2020. For the first few years, we could not get any coverage in the media. The reason was simple. Because wholly pasture-fed ruminants require few, if any, inputs, which is one of the reasons that the Pasture for Life system is generally both profitable and resilient, we were not in a position to place advertisements, the lifeblood of the media, and therefore to secure advertorial. However, so many positive stories started emerging, particularly following the publication of It Can Be Done, and thanks to our communications director, that stories started flowing into the media. Whilst the main focus continues to be on raising ruminants for meat, a growing number of dairy farms are now certified to produce wholly pasture-fed milk. Conscious of the nutritional pressures on dairy cows, before launching this option, considerable time and effort was committed to ensuring that their nutritional and welfare requirements were properly met. The business model remains simple: to establish the identity of wholly pasture-fed produce and ensure its integrity, to support our producer members through knowledge exchange, to develop the market for pasture life produce. Supporting the membership through knowledge exchange is done through an online forum in which issues and problems are raised and generally solved through shared experience. Here are just a few of the many topics covered. We also have a number of farm walks. Developing the market proved much more difficult, not so much in terms of creating demand, but in balancing supply and demand. Unlike milk, which is produced every day and varies little in its nature, the production span of a mature animal can be 24 to 30 months, and the carcass produces a wide range of products for which demand changes significantly during the year. It is a continuous process of balancing supply and demand. Developing the market has been further hampered because in the UK the definition of grass-fed is simply that the animal's diet has included at least 51% grass over its lifetime. As a result, much of the meat sold as grass-fed in UK will in practice not be wholly grass-fed. We continue to work with government to seek a change in the definition so that grass-fed means 100% grass-fed. A key element of the PFLA's work continues to be providing the evidence to support the perceived benefits of pasture for life. Not surprisingly, raising ruminants wholly on their natural diet generates a number of benefits to the health and welfare of the animals, to the natural environment, in terms of soil fertility, biodiversity, water retention, carbon sequestration and so on, and to the well-being of those who consume the product, as well as to the financial resilience of the farm. From the outset, we have endeavoured to provide the evidence for any claims that we make in two ways. The first is to produce reports based on the available literature, and the second is to engage with the main agricultural research stations in the UK and offer them access to our members' farms so that they can objectively sample them for biological, chemical, economic and social data. By far the largest of these research studies, now entering its second year, is a 3-year project with the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. Quote, evaluating the agronomic and social impacts of the Pasture for Life certified approach to grazing management and its potential as the basis of a sustainable GB-wide system. Following a literature review of the evidence supporting the health benefits of Pasture for Life meat and dairy, the University of Newcastle is taking samples of meat and milk, as well as of pasture and soil, from certified farms to further identify the levels of these benefits. In response to a request from the Department of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, the PFLA produced a detailed report on the animal welfare and environmental benefits of Pasture for Life. We believe that the soil is alive and that biodiverse pasture, grazed with animals, plays a vital role in sustaining its health and fertility and its capacity to feed humanity. 3 years ago, we brought together 50 farmers and 25 soil plant scientists to think about how we might monitor the pulse or well-being of the living soil, using a number of proxy indicators. The report can be found here. Emerging out of that event came the increasingly popular Soil Mentor app for monitoring the health of the soil, with protocols for over 20 different proxy indicators. A sense of community and culture has always been important to the PFLA. 4 years ago, we commissioned Adam Horowitz to become our poet in residence and to spend a few days on each of the 4 certified farms during each of the 4 seasons. The result was the wonderful book of poetry called The Soil Never Sleeps. Now, in its second, expanded edition, it's about to be released as an audiobook, interspersed with music by the fiddler Becky Dellau. A few weeks ago, an art project emerged from a meeting of PFLA farmers and ecologists in the West Country who were looking into the possibility of identifying key species of birds, mammals and plants that might be indicators of ecological wellness on their farms. The project is the idea of one of the farmers present, who is also a textile artist. 45 farmers recommended their favourite birds, 31 species to date. A group of 5 farmer members who are also artists will now produce artwork for a travelling exhibition in the spring of 2021, supported by both poetry and music. The PFLA is a movement rather than an organisation. Overseen by a board of directors elected by the members, there are no full-time staff. Most of the work is done by volunteers. Direct annual operating costs are still less than £90,000. The focus continues to be on growing both the movement and the market, supporting the members and continuing to work with the research community to build the evidence. It is just 9 years since the PFLA was established as a community interest company of farmers. It is now a nationwide movement across UK and expanding into Ireland. Its focus remains that of encouraging farmers to raise their ruminant animals wholly on pasture as part of a mixed, closed-looped farming system with all the benefits that this brings to the animals, to the environment and to those who consume their produce. The evidence of those benefits can be seen on these farms and in the results of the field trials. We are happy to share our experience with others and hope that you will feel encouraged by what has been achieved by a group of thoughtful and collaborating farmers.